The 2014 election season is going on now. Early voting began this week in Illinois and continues through next week, March 15th. Chicago voters can vote at any of early voting locations throughout the city. One of the hottest races in Illinois is going on right here in Logan Square. Will Guzzardi is again challenging Toni Berrios for her seat as the representative of the 39th District in the Illinois House. Toni Berrios, of course, is the daughter of Cook County Assessor Joe Berrios, a man whose name is commonly uttered in the same breath as either the word powerful or entrenched. She holds the office that her father held until 2002.
You have a petition going around, too, because I want the mayor's office to see that the community cares about our schools. We want community schools to stay in the community with our community children.
You know if you live in the 39th District because for the past several weeks you've been receiving mailers with Will Guzzardi's name and face all over them, most of them coming from his opponent's campaign. Several of these mailers have raised eyebrows among observers for their sensational nature, including depictions of Guzzardi as a champion of sexual predators. LoganSquare.TV sat down with Will Guzzardi last week for an extensive interview about his campaign. I found out a little bit about who he is besides a candidate for public office.
There were friends whom I did improv comedy with in college. And Chicago, of course, is like the world's great improv city. And so we studied together at the I.O., the famous improv theater over on Clark Street, and I performed there for a few years when I first got here. So that was something that was a really wonderful part about being in Chicago.
He also talked about politics in Illinois and how he was motivated to run after covering local politics in the 2010 election for Huffington Post.
It was a story I did about this group called the Healthy Hermosa Coalition, and it was an incredibly eye-opening thing for me because these organizations, first of all, were doing incredible work in that community, but second of all, were just desperate for resources from the state, and our state government wasn't providing those resources. They were 18 months behind on their reimbursements to these tiny little neighborhood nonprofits. And I remember these women who were running these organizations were talking about how long it had been since they'd taken a paycheck because they couldn't cut their services, and they were the only staff, so they just kept on working for free until the state would finally get its act together. And that story, writing that story, reporting that story, was probably the turning point for me in terms of realizing that I couldn't just keep sitting on the sidelines while state government was failing our community. That I couldn't just write about it. I had to get involved in some sort of proactive way.
I do want to mention that we did speak with the Berrios campaign and request an interview with the candidate, but have not received a response. Part 2 of the interview with Will Guzzardi will be available on LoganSquare.TV next week, when we'll hear Guzzardi's response to some of the charges by the Berrios campaign.
I think it's, in some important ways, emblematic of the kind of politics that we're trying to change, the very fundamental issues in this race, right? That the entrenched establishment politics, the politics of smear campaigns and bad Photoshop jobs and misleading attack ads. This is exactly the kind of politics that folks in our district are done with, that we're tired of. We're ready for something different.
For LoganSquare TV, I'm Dan O'Donnell.